meeting to order. 6:33 p.m. on Tuesday, April 6th. Roll call, please. Ms. Talbot or Ms. Milton, who's ever here.
I'm here on it. I'll do it.
Hello, Marilyn.
Hi, everybody. Mr. Orris,
Yes, I'm here.
Mr. Slocum,
Hello, I'm here.
Mr. Burway,
I'm present.
Mr. Jinks.
Yep, I'm here.
Okay, Jim. Miss Nichols,
Here.
Miss Pavano,
Here.
Mr. Talbot,
Here.
Mr. Veliver,
Here.
and Mr. Walsh.
Here.
We have a quorum of the council.
Thank you, Ms. Milton. Let's rise for the Pledge of Allegiance, please. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Justice for all.
All righty. The only item on the agenda this evening is proposed fiscal year 21-22 operating budget, annual capital budget, 5-year capital expenditure plan for the education system, the Board of Ed. I want to welcome Dr. Solon and Mr. Massiana from the Board of Ed and Mr. Grippo. I don't see any other members, so hopefully I haven't missed anybody, but thank you. I know you guys have been working a lot lately. And Jeff, I do want to say thank you for all of your hard work and your staff during COVID. I know you guys have done a great job. It's been, I think Cheshire, from what I can tell, has been a lot more in the school than a lot of other communities. And I think our children are much better for that. So I certainly appreciate your efforts and all the efforts of the school system in that regard. I think it's important that we mention that because I think you've done a great job in that regard. So I want to make sure that I mention that to both of you and Adam. So with that, I guess I'm going to turn it over to our Board of Ed Chair, Mr. Bory.
Well, I've never been on the Board of Ed, but that's okay.
Or excuse me, our Budget Chair.
I know. It's one body that
It's been a long day today, folks. I got a lot on my mind, so I apologize.
Sorry. That's all right. Anyway, thank you, Mayor Orris. Appreciate that. We are going to review the largest budget. It's the largest expenditure of our general government. And with that small opening, because we are anxious to see the details of this, I'll hand it over to the Vice Chairman of the Board of Ed for some opening comments, and he will probably hand it over to the superintendent and assistant, I'm sure.
Thank you, Mr. Bowery. Again, thank you for the invitation this evening. I'm filling in for Chairman Perugini. I'm also the chairman of the Finance Committee of the Board of Ed. As you know, it was a particularly unique budget year for the Board of Education because there's so many unknowns going into next year. When we originally looked at the superintendent's budget, our attitude was we have no idea what was going to happen next year. There's a little more clarity now with the vaccinations rolling out, and it seems like everything is going pretty smoothly. And we were really dealing with, well, what is the year going to look like? Is it going to be like this year? Is it going to be like a normal year, or is it going to be a mix of the two? And what kind of resources are we going to need to help all of our students transition back to hopefully a more normal year next year? And because of that, we passed a budget that was essentially untouched, which is very rare, certainly for this current board, and even for boards of the past. So this is a little bit new territory for us as well, and we hope that we can work together to find at least a middle ground when you guys complete your deliberations.
Thank you, Mr. Grippo. All right, do you want to hand it? We're ready now for Superintendent Dr. Solon? I believe.
Absolutely, yeah, go for it.
Thank you.
Dan or
Okay.
Jeff, it's your show. Go ahead.
All right.
I'm here for
Thank
moral
you.
support mostly.
All right. Well, hey, it's your budget that he's going to give us the details of it. Thanks.
Mr. Grippo, don't sell yourself short. And thank you, Mr. Barwi. And I just before I kick off the presentation, I just want to acknowledge Chairman Orris's comments on how we've managed through the pandemic. Certainly, it's been a community-wide effort with our partners on the town side, but I really have to commend our staff that goes into the buildings every day, and particularly our students. The assistant superintendent, Marlene Solano, and I met with hundreds and hundreds of parents, and it was over about 700 parents over the late spring last year virtually, many expressing concerns about what if kids don't do this or wear masks, and our students right from the get-go were incredibly vigilant, and they deserve a lot of credit, and they're a big part of the reason why we're in every day. And another big part is our former students, our graduates from Cheshire High, who, when I solicited when we were in need of substitutes, came out in droves and allowed us to stay open every day. So there's plenty of credit to go around, and it was a community-wide effort, and we're definitely proud of the way that our community and team handled it. So thank you for that, Mr. Orris. I will present a screen if you'll indulge me, and holy smoke, I'm getting a lot of screens coming up. Can everybody see that okay?
Mhm.
Let me do this.
Yeah, it looks clear. Thank you.
Okay, that's probably a little easier to see. Are you seeing the actual presentation and not?
No, we see your whole screen, Jeff, with the next slide and all that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that's just slide 2 right there. Now it's back to 1.
Let me try and see if I can see what you're seeing.
Jeff, I've had that happen too. I think if you go to display settings at the top, you can adjust it.
Yep, you should be able to change. I was going to say there's got to be the start slideshow or something somewhere that'll just do the 1.
Yeah. Oh, it was better. The first one was better.
Yeah,
How are we doing
there
now?
you go.
There you
There
go.
it is.
Okay,
Yeah,
thanks, Sean.
that's it. No problem.
Perfect.
Appreciate that. So, I mean, this is really, that was just a quick example of, as we went into last year in the pandemic, and we have gone through this year, everybody was deathly afraid that our students wouldn't learn much. And, all these concerns, they've learned so much, little things like screen display, because I guarantee you Sean couldn't have told me that a year ago, but they've learned so much beyond what we had patterned for them to learn. And I'm going to go into a little bit of many of the things that they've covered. But I want to kick off by thanking the Board of Education, who was very diligent in their review of our budget, and our team that put that together. But I also want to acknowledge, again, our students. And this has been a very difficult year. We've had 750 or so students who have been remote. They've elected to be remote. Hopefully soon they'll feel comfortable coming back into our buildings. But for 750 of our students, they may not step foot in a school for 17 months if they return next August. The state hasn't decided if remote education will be available or not, or mandated. So, think about that in your childhood, spending 17 months without going to school, at least in person. And we're doing our best to provide for them remotely. But I want to begin with that point, because I think it's critical when we consider our resources for next year, that's the sort of unprecedented situation that we're going to be trying to navigate. So when we look at our budget, we are always considerate of our destination. We want our students to graduate being outstanding complex thinkers and strong social emotional learners. And what we provide through our budget, obviously people are aware of the classroom instruction that occurs for more than 4,000 students, but we also provide mental health, nutrition, medical care, many extracurricular activities, transportation. So our needs and our supports go well beyond the classroom. And again, this is why we provide that support. These are just some of the faces whose decisions that we make through this process will be shaped in the coming years. So we began our process internally as our leadership team with our principals and program leads, and identified an internal budget that was 8%. And we recognized that obviously wasn't going to work, and we started to come down. And this has been our reality over the last 5 years in terms of budget expenditures. We're averaging 1.17% over the last 5 years. And so we've had to be, cut our lines down to razor thin margins. And then obviously, we've increased fees, we've foregone advancement. The maintenance has taken the biggest hit here. We strategized through insurance last year, but we're going to hear a lot about insurance tonight. So we've been focusing on social emotional learning, complex thinking, and what's critical to our families is maintaining class size. So they don't want to see larger classes than what we currently have. So what we've done in the past to manage that 1%, we've certainly, as you know, had a decline in enrollment over the last many years. And you'll see tonight where that's rebounding. We've maintained line items at the same amount or less than they were 5 years ago. Certainly renegotiated contracts, and a big one was our copy contract not that long ago. Shared services with the towns, and certainly we've had to do things as efficiently as we possibly can. And part of that comes with clear definition of what it is that we're trying to do. And so we aren't buckshotting. We're very much focused on social emotional learning and complex thinking, and those have paid huge dividends. Those management strategies have been offset a bit by special education needs. Those costs continue to rise, and obviously this year COVID-19 played a substantial role. So the Board of Education has approved a budget for next year of $78,487,052. And that's been forwarded to you here this evening. That represents a pretty substantial increase, particularly when you look at the last 5 years, of roughly $3.9 million or 5.22%. So the budget highlights, you'll see less than 1% of our increase. It's a sliver dedicated to professional development and technology and teaching through learning gaps. That's basically missed learning opportunities that students have had over the last year, and so change related to COVID. Restoring the medical benefits funding to match expected claims. I know Mr. Massiana has already given kind of an overview of that to some of you, and he'll be addressing that further this evening. And then, of course, we're in this budget looking to address building and equipment issues. So if you look at our budget and how we have kind of structured this, that $12,000 for professional development was the improvement money we had in our budget. The entire remainder of the budget fell into either contractual things like staffing, wage increases, maintaining class sizes where they are, unemployment, workers' compensation, pension, Social Security, things like that. And then the restoring piece, the lion's share of that is the insurance premiums that we're going to talk about, as well as $370,000 to maintenance and $50,000 for new and replacement equipment. Those lines have been down significantly over the last 5 years, and given the conditions, the well-noted conditions of our facilities, we're looking to kind of just restore that to a certain degree. Our insurance impact, as I mentioned, just to kind of give you a walkthrough, and the community probably more than you, a walkthrough of our history. We budgeted a run rate, a monthly claims rate of approximately $725,000 per month, because we expected claims to come in at $800,000 a month. The claims, unfortunately, were sizably higher than that. They averaged over $1 million a month from July to December, which pretty significantly drained our reserve fund. And we shoot for about 2 months of claims at least is a buffer in that. And we're under $1 million. That wasn't even 1 month of claims in July. So it was getting pretty perilously low. And we're projecting that claims January through June will certainly be below $1.1 million, and that's come to fruition at this point so far. But they're certainly not that $725,000 amount we budgeted. We never expected claims to be that low. So we've budgeted for next year a claims rate of $900,000 per month. And so basically, if the claims fall below 900,000, we may put a dent in our pool, and by that I mean improving what's there. That may start to make some progress in the pool. But our claims are expected to be approximately $900,000 a month next year. So this budgeting is not designed to restore the pool. And so with a little bit more detail on that, I'm going to pass it off to Vin. That's not Vin's photo, by the way. It's just a slide.
Thank you, Jeff, and good evening, everyone. So the medical benefits that I'm going to talk a little bit more in detail tonight. I start with this because as a town council and a board of ed, and administrative team, we've been through this situation before where we had a strong medical benefits reserve, tried to draw it down slowly, and then we hit a bad claims year like we do this year. And so we find ourselves in a situation where we have to increase our budget substantially. So that's the theme of the next few slides. If you go to the following slide, please, Jeff. I know this is very, very busy in terms of a slide, but I want to focus your attention first on that middle section that says medical benefits budget detail. Just to walk you through that. Funding for claims is $10,786,000 for next year. Okay, so that's the dollar amount of the total budget request that is being set aside for claims. But also included in our medical benefits budget is stop loss premiums, and that is $1,026,000 for next year. And that covers any individual claim that exceeds $175,000. It's essentially insurance. So we pay the $1 million in premium, but it protects us from claims of $175,000 or more, which in certain years, can actually equal the $1 million in premiums that we're going to pay. And I won't take you through a detailed history of stop loss, but that is an important insurance that we have, and it's protected us from having even higher costs over the recent few years. We also fund HSA contributions to our employee account, $637,000. Administrative fees that we pay to Cigna and Optum for administering our plans, which are self-insured. I know the council members know that. That's $374,000 budgeted for next year. Employees who waive benefits receive either $1,000 or a $1,200 payment for waiving benefits. However, I will note that we phase that out in the teacher contract, so only teachers that have been waiving insurance for the last 3 years or longer are still getting that waiver. And then we contribute for employee assistance plan and wellness plans. That's about $8,000. And so you see the total there of total before employee contributions is actually $12.9 million. However, our employees do co-share. They pay for a portion of their medical benefits. And so we get about $1.79 million expected next year in employee contributions towards their medical benefits. And I've also factored in here to calculate our budget for this year, reimbursements of stop loss of about $500,000. So that 10,617,983 is the budget request for our medical benefits line. And this page, by the way, is in the budget book on page 10 under the medical benefits section. If you look just to the right, there's a history of our reserve fund balance. And you could see that in June of 2013, that balance was 2,178,000, and then it dropped as low as 749,215. And then from June of 2016 through June of 2020, you'll see that the reserve balance, grew to as high as 3.9 million. And we started this fiscal year with that $2.9 million in reserve. But as of February 29th, so that's just over a month ago, we're down to 996,000. So we've essentially used about $2 million worth of reserve in the first 8 months of this claim year. And I'm going to show you that in a minute. That's primarily due to large claims over 25,000. Okay, so that's the budget, that's the reserve balance. Jeff, just go back to that slide, because what I wanted to highlight is all the way over on the left where I highlighted in yellow those percent changes. So in 2003, 2004, you'll see that the expenditures for our medical benefits line jumped up by 23%. And then you'll see that in 2009-10, again, it jumped up 26%. In 14-15, it jumped 19%. And then this year's budget request, 21-22, is 21.5%. And what that is, what I'm trying to illustrate is this is the deja vu portion again, where we fund medical benefits. When we have a strong reserve, we tend to not fund our contributions at the rate of expected claims, because we try and gradually use that reserve fund. And then, in the year that we have to increase our contributions to equal claims, we ask for a large budget request. There might be better ways to do this, but we've as a team here, we've struggled with this over the years. And the last thing before you go to the next slide, I do want to point out, which I'll go through a little bit more detail, but if you look at the year beginning 16-17 over on the left, 17-18, 18-19, and 19-20, we actually reduced the medical benefits lines for 4 years in a row, increased it last year, and then are increasing it again this year. So that's a backdrop. On the next slide, what you're going to see is for the period last fiscal year, July of 2019 through February of 2020. What I'm showing you here are the claims that were $25,000 or more. And if you look over on the right side where it shows you claim type, you'll see that we had 6 claims related to cancer that totaled $849,000. And I'm just going to kind of top line this. So we had a total of 32 claims during the July to February period last year, totaling $2.15 million. If we now look at the same period this fiscal year, Jeff, if you move the slide, we have 57 claims totaling $3.7 million. So that's roughly a $1.6 million increase over last year, which is a significant portion of what we're seeing that's eroded the medical reserve fund. The other thing that I want to point out on the right side here, where you see the total of 57 totaling 3.7 million, just above that, only 3 of the claims were related to COVID-19. So they totaled $93,000. So it's really not COVID that is driving this increase in medical claims. You'll see up at the top of that section, GI, ear, nose, throat, endocrine, organ, kidney failure, surgeries. We've had $1.2 million in 19 claims you can see cancer is actually a little bit lower this year than it was last year at about 772,000. Bone, spine, joint, replacement of hips and knees, there's been 14 of those claims totaling 758,000. And then you could see that, the rest are, $400,000 or less. So that's what's driving the bulk of this year's bad claims. It's those larger claims, and it isn't COVID per se. If you go to the next slide, Jeff, I'm just showing you here the year over year, right? 32 claims is now 57, same period, 2.1 million became $3.7 million. So that's just a comparison. And we'll obviously share these slides with the town council members after this evening. And Jeff, if you go to the next slide, which is, I think, an important summary. Again, it's a little bit busy, but all the way over to the left, you'll see the actual medical benefit expenditures and budget from 15-16 through the request for 21-22. So you'll see that in 16-17, if you look one column over now, the budget actually decreased by 65,000. And then in 17-18, it decreased by about 152,000. And then 18-19, 153,000, and 19-20, 326,000. And then we did increase last year because we knew we needed to fund higher to meet expected claims. And then this year is the 1.87 million. In the next section over, what I'm showing you is the cumulative change of those budget reductions from 16-17 through 2021. You'll see that the cum went up as high as $697,000 lower. And then last year, because we increased the budget, the cumulative change was a minus 73,000. And so if I add this year's requested budget, the cumulative change from 15-16 through 21-22 will be $1.8 million or 3.4%. And the point of this is that if we had been funding 3.4% per year, so if we would have been funding in line with expected claims, we would be averaging about 3.4% per year. So you look at the 21% increase and say, gee, why did that happen? Well, it's because we had decreased the budget at a time when claims were going up, but they're going up 3.4% per year, which is actually modest. It's a little bit below the medical inflation rate. So this increase has a lot more to do with use of reserves and now having to catch up than it has to do with, a significant change in our claim rate. Although this year was a high claim year, there's no doubt about it. If you look at it over this long period of time, we're still doing okay. And as we rolled into January and February of this year, we did see our claim rate come down. We're hovering just below 800,000 per month. We started the new plan year in January, so I expect that to continue for another couple of months. So where we end up, with our reserve fund this year, I'm hoping we sustain where we are, roughly in the $1 million range. And then if we increase our budget as requested to the 900,000 per month level, and those claims come in as expected, we should be able to retain that $1 million. And hopefully we'll get a break next year and claims will be lower than the 900,000, and that reserve will start to build again. And that has been the history. We make an increase to match our claims rate, and then claims tend to drop off a little bit and that reserve builds up. So that's the cycle that we've been in historically, and it's where we are this year. It accounts for 48% of the budget increase. But that's really the short explanation of what happened, actually, even though it might seem really long, but that's the history. And so I think that was the last slide in this set, Jeff. So I'll pause if there's questions.
Unfortunately, I can't see the screen, so
Yeah, Mr. Slocum has his hand up. He has a question.
thank you.
Yeah, and I'd be happy to ask the question, and then if you feel like you want to hold on it, that's fine. What role, I know the town got involved with CREC, and I think that was just on the insurance side, maybe related to stop loss things and in that direction. But has there been a cost benefit analysis associated with that? Has that been a good thing that sort of cut some of these uses of reserves? And again, that might be a good question for an awaited long answer. And I can do that.
Well, I'll give you a quick answer, and then I'll follow up, as we normally do. I'll provide additional information, via email. But you're correct, Tim. We, in 16, I believe it was, moved our stop loss insurance from Symetra to CT Prime Inc. And that has been a good thing. The premium increases, which we've had, each of the years that we've been with CT Prime have been below the market, even though, we had some years like last year with CT Prime, we paid between the town and the Board of Ed about $1 million in premium, and we received about $2 million in stop loss reimbursement. Now, if we had been with a different carrier, our premium probably would have doubled, and it didn't. It went up 20%. So I'll provide the detail, but it has been a win for us, as a town and Board of Ed. We do shop it. I do want to, let you know that we do shop the stop loss. And the last time we did it with Cigna, they didn't even want to quote because they could not touch the rate that we were getting from CT Prime. So CT Prime consists of, 9 different towns that form their own stop loss insurance captive. And so we initially we kept the risk with the stop loss insurance. We're no longer doing that. 2 years ago, we were with Anthem. They underwrote the stop loss. We shopped it and moved it to Gerber for this fiscal year. I am on the board. I'm actually the president of CT Prime still. We're in our negotiations for the renewal, which is going to be pretty modest for next year. But it has served us well. And then it's kept the premiums, lower than had we been outside of CT Prime.
Thank you, Vin.
Any other medical benefits questions?
Mr. Orris had his hand raised as well.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah.
Vin, maybe I missed something, and I appreciate your detailed review of the medical trust fund accounts. So essentially what you're saying is this was expected because we were not funding appropriately towards the medical trust fund. But what I think I heard either Dr. Solon or you say earlier was that your expected run rate was $725,000 per month last year. And in a 6-month period, it ran to about $1.1 million. Is that correct?
The expected was 800,000. That's what we had gotten from our basically the actuary, medical benefits broker. We budgeted 725,000, and the actual claims came in at 1.1 million.
Okay.
The reason we budgeted 725 versus the 800 is because our reserve balance was about $3 million.
Correct. So that's why I kind of want to be clear, because, the way you explained it, I think the public could take it as somehow, it wasn't appropriate management. And I suspect it's going to come back to the council, because I know the council does play a role in the way sometimes these trust funds are used. But in your own budgeting, had that played out at $725,000 per month, this account would be absolutely fine. but for the fact that it went to $1.1 million for 6 months, which we did not expect, nor did you expect, because it wasn't in your budgeting, it added another $2.25 million off of that account. So that's really the issue. So I'm not sure, in my opinion, I'm buying the full explanation of this was kind of expected because we've underfunded this for the last 5 years, and that's what we typically do.
Yeah, I will clarify, Mr. Orris, that, I wasn't implying that this was not expected. The level of claims is much higher than anybody would have expected. But what I am saying is that, we occasionally hit a claim year that's not expected. It's a high claim year. And then in that year, when we have to fund back to the claim rate, which we're going to need to do because we don't have reserve, sufficient reserve to get us through next year, in my opinion. That's why we have to make this adjustment. So it is a cycle. It's nobody's fault. I mean, we budget cooperatively. Luck of the draw with claims.
Yeah, well, I think that's the point. The fact of the matter is, in your own budgeting and our expectation, we never envisioned these drawdowns to be at $1.1 million per month. Had it stayed at 725 or even $800,000, which was given to you by whoever, that's a far cry, and this account would be in much better shape if it played out that way.
Yeah, right. And, I mean, to kind of add to that, we did increase the budget $700,000 last year because we knew we needed to start increasing to get the contributions in line with claims. I saw I don't want to take over for Mr. Bari, but I saw Mr. Grippo had his.
Yeah, I would really rather have Mr. Bari please run the meeting.
No, I was just going to call on Mr. Grippo if Mayor Orris is set.
I am. Thank you, Vin.
Okay. All right. Mr. Grippo?
Thank you. I wasn't sure how to get it. I wasn't sure who was calling on who, and I just wanted to get my hand in there so someone would see me. Thank you. I just wanted to add, so during our budget deliberations, this was obviously the largest issue for us when we were going through our budget. And, many of us, certainly on the finance committee and the entire board, we were looking at this pattern here where you see these huge increases, and they seem, sort of cyclical, but the actuaries couldn't give us any really good reason as to why they happen when they do. There wasn't a good reason, and we're really trying to figure out a legitimate way to, going forward, be able to adequately have a good reserve and to be able to plan our expenditures accordingly. Normally, like in an insurance company, when you're doing a reserving, you don't have these huge spikes like this. And if you do, they are moderately expected. And in this case, there wasn't really any predictability to this. And so for us, we were, incredibly disappointed to see these large expenditures. I'm sure, the people who needed that care, I'm glad that they got it. And just from a financial point of view, it was incredibly disappointing to see this large expenditure come out. And we were sort of at a loss as to how to sort of prevent this going forward when we see this pattern occurring over and over again, let's say every 5 to 7 to 8 years or so. And we didn't really have any good answers because even if you don't self-insure anymore and you go back to a traditional plan, Vin was telling us that it's even more expensive on a per year basis than what we're looking at here. And so it's really not there's really no good answers to this. And so that's kind of where we are right now. And I just wanted to let you know where our heads were at when we deliberated this for hours and hours as to how to kind of fix this going forward, because everywhere else we thought we did things right, and in the end we had this huge spike in expenditure. So
Mr. Orris?
David, Rob, and Adam, this is one of those things you just can't anticipate. I mean, you look at where your balance is, you budget going forward based on what your expected run rate is, and you make a decision. Unfortunately, in this case, it didn't work out. So it is what it is. We obviously have to address it, and there's no question that we have to make sure that this fund is solvent going forward to be able to pay these. But I'm not sure there's anyone to blame here. It's just, it's unfortunate and it happened. And I'm not sure there's an easy answer to how you keep this from happening again, because you never know when you're going to have an extraordinary year in these kinds of expenses.
I don't know who was up next, and I
Mr.
don't
Chairman?
see everybody.
Well,
So-
Mr. Slocum, if you.
Well, I don't want to cut in, but I can't see anybody, so I just spoke up. So whoever was before me should be able to ask a question.
Oh, Mr. Slocum, did you have a question?
I did, but we're not on gallery view. I'm looking at a
Tim, I
chart.
think somebody cut your line.
Okay.
We can hear you if you would like.
Oh, okay. Yeah, fine. I'll ask my question then.
Please.
I think maybe an answer to some of this is actually to make a policy of some type that sort of creates this fund that really can't be adjusted or reserved. Whatever's residual, in other words, can't be touched. And that's sort of a conversation outside of a budget conversation, but maybe we need to give ourselves the discipline so that that account isn't touched when it can be so tempting. Now, I recognize we can choose to fund it annually, however we choose to fund it. If the actuaries say 800 and we want to do 725, that's our decision. But if in fact we're using sources of the reserves to really reduce, whether it's a tax increase or other, to increase other areas of the budget, and make the mill rate, okay. Maybe we just have to say we can't do that with the medical trust fund. That's just a policy decision, but maybe that's really a way to make this less possible or be less of an onerous issue going forward. Just a comment, just for policy consideration.
The issue with that might be that if it does get too high, that we may not want to have undue large amounts of funds in the different accounts that really could be used to offset what some of the expenses are. So there's a balance there, and certainly competing priorities. Mr. Walsh, you have a.
Yeah, thank you, Ms. Bowery. Just a couple questions. First, I'm amazed that it went up so much this year, especially when I heard many companies who self-insure, their funds went way down because a lot of elective surgeries were not performed last year because of COVID. But it's just I don't think anybody could have predicted this. And I like Adam said, I'm happy that these people were able to get the help that they needed, and hopefully they're on their way to recovery for whatever reason. I do have a question. I mean, as Mr. Orr said, I mean, for the past 5 years, our reserve fund balance was way over the 2 months that you required. So, I mean, I think it has been funded properly for the past 5 years. It's just something happened this year. The 10,617,000 that you're requesting, is part of that to replenish the reserve fund, and the rest would be towards the monthly? Is that how you're looking at it?
Yeah, I can address that. I would just add that I don't think it, and if it came off that way, I know this is not Vin nor mine, and I think I'm comfortable speaking for Adam on this too. It's nobody's intention to indicate that there was improper funding at any level on this. I think, Rob said it best. It's just something that happens periodically. You can't predict this. It's harder than the weather to know that somebody's going to get cancer in a year from now. And so it's just one of those things that comes about. And unfortunately, we're in the unenviable position of trying to manage it. I appreciate Tim's comments about, is there a way to soften this in the future? Because this hurts, to have half of our budget dedicated to medical benefits, where it certainly supports the classroom, but we're looking to more directly influence what happens in the classroom. So, I know Vin and Sean and I have been discussing strategies that would make sense. And address those competing desires to obviously make sure the claims are covered, but also not have the pool get so high that we could ease the burden on the taxpayer by taking some of that money. So we're trying to work on a strategy for that. And I know we can, share that, and maybe it is something we work through on policy. But to answer the second part of your question, Don, more directly, no, this is only designed to cover the 900,000 per month claim, plus stop loss premiums, HSA contribution, the other items that are on this slide in the bottom right hand corner.
So that reserve fund could realistically stay where it is.
Correct.
So, that's a concern too. I understand, like Tim said, it's a concern that we have to figure out a way to make sure that doesn't get too low either.
Yeah, agreed.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Sure.
Scrolling through to see if there's other questions. Yes, Mayor Orris regarding.
Yes, thanks. So Vin or Dr. Solon, at the $900,000 budget, based on what Don just said, obviously if the run rate's 900, we're not adding much or anything to the principal balance of our fund. Do you think that 900, was that based on giving yourself some cushion? It sounds like last year you budgeted 7.25. Maybe someone else had said you should have done 800. Was that your actuary or somebody who did that? I mean, is 900 giving yourself some anticipated extra dollars?
I'll answer that. It really isn't, Rob. The 800,000 and the 900,000 do come from the benefits broker, who does, they provide that information as part of the renewal, and they do that, for both the board and the town side. So the 900,000, the only, and I don't want to call it cushion, but what's not factored in is what we receive in prescription rebates. So if we get, like this year, we'll be getting about 260,000 in prescription rebate. It's some years it's higher, some years it's lower. So if we get the rebate and we hit the 900,000 a month, that would theoretically add to the reserve balance, right? Because everything flows through the reserve. If our stop loss reimbursements are more or less than 500,000, it would either increase or decrease, that reserve balance. So I feel comfortable if we're funding to the expected claims rate this year, that 900,000. If we end the year with $1 million or maybe a little bit more than $1 million, we'll at least sustain ourselves through next year. We didn't want to go and ask for a lot more funding to build a cushion any further. We think this is a, big ask, but necessary.
Yeah, and I agree with that, Ben. I wasn't saying it because I was thinking there, we could cut the 900. I just want to kind of get a sense of what you're thinking. If you really think it's 900, we're running this pretty close. And, I guess what I would say is that, when we get to the revenue conversation, certainly from your side and even on our side of the street, we're getting some one-time infusion of dollars. Maybe that's a place we can be looking at to help, fortify this area a little bit.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, I know we're going to be talking about the COVID revenue as part of tonight's presentation as well.
Thank you.
If that takes care of, I don't see any other hands up for medical, then I guess you can move on to the rest of your presentation. Then we'll do general questions.
Thank you very much. As you know, this is just the high level overview of our budget request this year. The pie chart illustrates kind of where that money is going. 80% of our budget historically is dedicated to salaries and benefits for the people that we employ. We're very human resources rich here. This is what we focus on. That's our industry, providing that human contact with our students. Support services being the next largest component, which includes our transportation budget, our instructional expenses. Special education is a significant part of what we do. It runs about 25% of our overall budget if you were to include things like outplacement, special education, transportation, and and the staff that we have dedicated to special education services. But it's a critical part of what we do, and it really shapes life outcomes for a lot of our students. Then finally, maintenance and operations. That's really the place where we turn, when we have to shave. And I think our maintenance team has done a good job in the community, in the town council through capital improvement. But that's generally where we turn to avoid direct classroom impact as much as possible. So of that budget increase, the percent of overall budget increases, we've talked a lot about medical benefits being really the dominant component here at $1.9 million. 48% of our budget increase is dedicated to addressing the issue we were just discussing. 746,000 is teacher salary increases, with about 120,000 addressing new staffing to maintain our ratios, and we'll talk about that momentarily. Maintenance and repair, 6% of the increase. Other professional services, which includes Apex Technology, it's a shared service with the town, and as well as our legal services, and then instructional assistant salaries. So this is roughly 82% of our entire budget increase. So again, by category, salaries, 2.32% of the increased. Benefits, that's obvious where that's going to be the largest part of our increase. Maintenance is a significant part as well. So obviously the two biggest, as you can see on the pie chart, being the benefits and maintenance increases in this current budget. Our projected revenues. Now this budget here is exclusive of some of the federal money that Rob was alluding to earlier, and Vin will touch upon that federal money later. But this is the traditional revenue sources that we anticipate in the forecast for next year in terms of revenue to the town. This, and I know I've been asked this question before, so I want to clarify, the $78 million request does not include this revenue. So this revenue goes to the town, netting out the request at like $68 million. So some of the things that we reduced, you saw that we had internally identified an 8% budget increase. And these were some of the things that we were focused on attempting to provide in our budget that were ultimately reduced. Some of these things have actually even been previously approved by the board, but just the funding wasn't there to continue these things, to move these projects forward. So the projected enrollment next year, I know, enrollment's been a significant topic of interest lately with the School Modernization Committee. And so I just kind of wanted to show you where things stand today. This is SLR on October 26th of this current school year, but 2020, projected our enrollment for next year. On September 14th of this school year, this is where our enrollment was relative to the 21-22 projections. And this is where it is now. We're already, we're closing the gap on that growth that was anticipated for next year. We added 37 students in grades K through 8 over the course of one academic year. That's a lot of students for us to net add over the course of a year. I think you probably recognize that the real estate market was very active this year. And as I, kind of tongue in cheek say, people don't move here for the nightlife. They're bringing families here to access the education available in our community. So we have the SLR, prognostication on the top line. NESDEC, the New England School Development Council, on the middle line is another firm that we use to project out our enrollment. They do these calculations. We're already 34 students beyond next year's projection. So we're growing quickly. is the point of that. In part, if you were participating in last night's or watched last night's School Modernization Committee meeting, you may have heard me reference this data. Here you'll see this year's current kindergartners. There were 167 births in Cheshire in 2015 that impacted this year's class. Next year, 205 births in that kindergarten class, 206, 202. What you see is the pattern changing. And in recent years, the population has had a mean age increase in Cheshire. Realtors will tell you as a result of older members of our community are turning over houses and younger people with families are moving in. And I think that's what you're seeing here more recently. You also see an increased demand for housing, and you know as well as anybody that on the council that includes developments. The table there didn't include 21 large homes off of Weiss Road. So, you know, as much as this presents a somewhat of a financial challenge, it means more demands, but it's also a sign that our community is thriving and that people want to be a part of it, and that should be a point of pride for us. So our enrollment here in the K through 6 schools, you'll see identified in this chart. The point of this chart being really circled in the red on the right-hand side, and all the way to your far right on the top part that I'm highlighting with the arrow now, our total staff count for the current academic year is 111 teachers in these grades. That average when the 1979 students is 17.8 students per class. Next year, we're moving to 113 teachers, but with the significant jump in enrollment, our class size average actually increases. So usually, you know, you may think that adding more teachers would bring down the average class size, and it's actually going up even with the addition of 2 teachers. Actually, we would need to add 5 teachers if we wanted the current class size that we have now, but we've budgeted 2. So this is our class size averages as it stands today in each classroom, and then the historical class averages you can see from this kind of right to left on this one, 18.1 and 13, 14, 20, 21, the current year 17.8, next year 18.3. Our goal is to maintain that historical average, as I mentioned earlier, very important to our families. And you'll see that the middle school, 7th and 8th grade, also running along the historical averages. This kind of illustrates that point where we have been historically in K through 6, and then 7, 8, you know, within that range of 21 to 25 in a class roughly. The high school students per certified staff member, we rank 17th out of 21 DERG B high schools. It's not like we have, you know, we on the lower quarter of teachers at Cheshire High in terms of the numbers per students per teacher. So the recommended net teaching maintenance here, what we've done at Chapman is maintain the number of teachers we have there for the 18.4 average there. At Doolittle, we've actually reduced 2 teachers at Doolittle. We've increased to 41 teachers from at Highland from 39, which nets out to 0. And then we've had to add a teacher both at Norton and Darcy. And, you know, the real reason there is when you jump from that 165 births in the kindergarten year to 205, there's a greater demand there. So we're adding teachers and increasing class size a little bit. So how do we compare to our peers? Really, this is more related to spending and performance. So we're as part of District Reference Group B, which is this cluster that the state defined of like communities similar to Cheshire and you can see that our spending ranks at the lower end of our peer group. And when you calculate that out, if we spent the average that other districts do per student, our budget would increase by $5 million. That's a 5%, as you know, increase over this year. It'd be pretty substantial. And so, you know, I think we've done very well relative to our peers in presenting an incredible value for our students and our community. Further elaborating on that return on investment, when you look at our dollars spent per SAT score, we ranked 10th at the last time the SAT was given. And in the 2 years ago, the last time the Smarter Balance assessment was given, we ranked 5th in Connecticut. And scary to think New Canaan spending $18 million more on a per pupil basis than we are. So, we again, providing tremendous value. We ranked 13th in the state in math, 9th in English language arts. When you combine the two, we're ranked 5th overall. What I'm perhaps most proud of, though, in all of that is that our special education is also ranked 5th out of K through 12 districts in Connecticut. And so, we have not been successful at the expense of students who have more significant needs, but we've been successful because of those students being successful. And that's what we're really proud of, that all of our students have demonstrated tremendous growth. So, at this point, I've worked in the district for 15 years. This is the highest achievement we've ever had as a school system, period, bar none, end of story. Our multiple elementary schools have been honored. Most recently, Norton is a National Blue Ribbon school, which is incredibly selective. Way under 1% of national schools received the honor. So we were very thrilled that Norton took home that honor this year. We're annually recognized as a top community for music in America. As a matter of fact, our K through 12 music director and high school band director, Mr. Kuhner, informed me today that we were again named this year one of the top communities for music in America. And these are all great selling points for families who want to move to Cheshire, which obviously supports our home values, but it's more important that these students have this sort of success and opportunity being a member of the Cheshire community. The COVID-19 impact this year was significant. I mentioned at the top of the show here that we have 750 students who have elected to be remote. Some of them have compromising medical conditions. Others are concerned about getting quarantined or other situations. Some may just prefer the remote environment. So I'm very concerned about transitioning those students back to school. I think it's critically important that we do so as soon as we're safely able. Today, we had about 380 staff members get vaccinated, their second vaccine. I think that's another helpful step in bringing more students back safely, those who choose to do so. But to be clear, from the beginning of the school year, pre-K through 8th grade, full days of school every day, unless we had an early dismissal for professional development or conferences. Most districts weren't close to that. And at the high school, we did 2 full days a week in. Every day was a full day of instruction, whether it remote or otherwise. A lot of districts split up their high schools. So half of the day would be a group of in-person learners. The other half of the day, those in-person learners would just be on their own all afternoon, and the other half of the students would be accessing remote learning. So, we're thrilled about what we've been able to accomplish with our students, but also concerned about, how do we continue that growth for them next year. So we conducted more PD than ever. Through that, the efforts that we've made it's almost shocking to know that a lot of our students are actually performing at or beyond our historical average in grade level work that is assessed. And then, there are also obviously significant costs incurred to maintain the safety and the success that we've had in the school system. So with more on that, I'm going to turn it over to Vin, who can go into more detail around, some of the financial implications of COVID-19.
Thank you, Jeff. And I guess there's a couple of things that I want to touch on. First of all, the budget that was presented and approved by the Board of Education did not include any expenses related to COVID-19 for next year. Instead, what we presented to the Board of Education, and I do want to review with the town council tonight, is a COVID-19 supplemental budget. And so before I get into that, I do want to do a quick review of where we are this year with COVID expenses, as well as the revenue that we either have expected and received or that we intend to use before the year is out. So if you could just focus your attention in the middle column that says estimated cost for full year as of 3/8/21, you'll see over on the left side where it gives you a description. These are the major costs related to COVID that we've incurred or will incur by the time the year is out. So we contracted to do intraday cleaning, sanitizing, and disinfecting at all the schools during the day by hiring day porters through Performance Environmental, our cleaning contractor. So you could see that cost is $225,000 for the year. We did that. It was actually part of the state's guidance that we needed to do this during the day, and we've done that successfully. The next line item, $300,000, our food service program, which the board is responsible to cover any revenue losses. They've mitigated, what was expected to be a $500,000 revenue loss. We're looking at about $300,000, and that comes from the fact that we, first of all, have our only 50% of our high school students in 4 days per week. All high school students are hybrid and remote on Wednesdays. And also our a la carte food sales have been close to zero. And then on top of that, because we packaged all the foods this year, which we didn't have those expenses last year, that combination is resulting in a loss to the food service program of $300,000. We are not depriving any students of meals. In fact, this year, the federal government has extended the lunch school nutrition program so that all students receive breakfast and lunch for free. We get reimbursed for those meals at different rates for breakfast versus lunch. And so we are still generating revenue, but we're just not generating as much as we had or would have had all our students been in. And so also as part of that mitigation, we did everything we could to reduce costs, labor costs, but not compromise on what we are offering students. And I will add one more point that for our remote learners that Jeff mentioned, those 750 students that are remote, we do provide meals for them. We have a pickup, 1 day a week at Dodd, 1 day a week at our high school for our remote learners. The rest of the cost, just quickly, we installed broadcast capability in 59 classrooms. That was $191,000. We've rented tents in the fall at all our elementary schools and Dodd and tables as well, so that we can increase the social distance. So when the weather was good, we spent $151,000 on tents. It worked out very, very well. The students used those tents, both on sunny days as well as rainy days to spread out. And all these things are important. I think it goes into our success in being able to keep our students in school. We have not had any COVID spread amongst our students and within school. Isolation room monitors, was a requirement that the state had put out. We did do that for most of the year, but we are no longer needing those isolation room monitors. So what we thought was going to be $135,000 cost is done at $64,000. Certainly purchase of PPE, sanitizing, disinfecting supplies, $120,000. We put a lot of furniture and equipment in storage so that we can maximize social distancing, $102,000. And we also had to have bus monitors. I call them the mask police that were on the buses for the first couple of months. And so that was another $55,000. So all told, we were estimating as of March about 1.2 million in COVID-related costs. And then we elected to add tents again in the spring. So, next week is April break. Tents will go up at all our schools, including the high school. They'll stay there till June. You'll see that's 133,000 is the cost. So the sum of the cost is 1.342 million. However, we did receive some funding from two different grants. That red line of 706,075 was received. That was the ESSER 1 funding. That next 85,000 that was received, that was the CARES Act funding, 85,000. We also expect that we'll be able to use the $200,000 in the unexpended education fund rollover from last year's budget. And we will have savings of about $60,000 in transportation. That's primarily from not running field trips and sports charters, through the fall and the winter seasons. So you'll see that we've got about $1,051,000 in cost offsets or those grant programs that I mentioned. So we still need to find about $291,000 in our operating budget to offset the total costs of COVID. But at a high level, that's the COVID picture that we're dealing with in this fiscal year. But because we've been in this full year, we don't expect that, this was a question that was received, we don't expect that we'll have any funds that we could carry over into the next fiscal year. Based on this, we'll need to find the 291,000. We've had a 60% freeze in place for non-payroll expenditures across the school. So that's how we'll be able to make up that 291,000 for this year. So that's the backdrop that I want to now look at. Well, what are we looking at for next year? When we presented our budget to the Board of Education, this is an updated now COVID-19 supplemental budget request. And I had talked to Sean Kimball, our town manager, about this approach as well. The one thing that has changed since we developed this budget is that when we approved the budget through the Board of Ed in January, we were not aware of any specific grants. But now 2 grants have been approved. And if you look at the bottom in red, you'll see that there's a line called ESSER 2 funding of $439,559. And then below that, the recently approved American Rescue Plan funding is $1,091,741. The ESSER 2 funding, we can use anytime between now and September of 2023. And the American Rescue Plan funding, we could use anytime between now and September of 2024. We don't intend to use any of those funds this fiscal year. We think that it's best that we use them in next year and the following fiscal years. And then if you go up, to the top, these are the categories that we are doing our best to estimate what we'll need. The one thing that no one knows is, what's going to happen next year with COVID. Is it through the vaccinations? Are these variants covered by the vaccination? And so next year will be a very normal year, and maybe we don't incur some of the expenses that I've outlined here. But maybe that doesn't happen, and maybe we'll need to continue to be in this mode where we have to continue to provide PPE and do the intraday disinfecting. and continue to pay for the unemployment costs that we're currently paying. So we don't know, none of us as we sit here tonight, exactly what the cost will be. But what we do know reasonably well is we believe any COVID-related costs we do incur next year will be covered by the grants that we receive. And in fact, this example shows that we think there'll be about $442,000 in carryover for 22, 23, and 23, 24. So we just cut that in half and assume that that's what we could use for the future fiscal years. And then not to belabor the point, because you could see some of the categories here are very common to what we've had this year, like the PPE and the furniture and equipment storage costs. But what is important to mention is that that first line, to address learning loss needs, the two grants, the ESSER 2 and American Rescue Fund, both are very specific in that you need to address any learning loss that occurs. So we've estimated about 225,000 needed for next year. And then further down the page, one of the things that is included, it's 20,000, so it's near the bottom. Those 750 students who are currently remote, we expect that it'll be returning next fall, but we want to do a transition program for them in August. So they'll have some time, in the school, with a small population of other remote learners. So we are anticipating that will cost about $20,000 as staff and related costs. That's what's in that 20,000. We may have summer school credit recovery is 25,000. So that is a learning loss that we will make up for in this summer, July and August. So the learning loss is an important component that we're estimating at this point. As we know more, as more assessments can be done as to what the learning loss is, those numbers, can change, as well as some of the other costs that are more safety and health related to COVID. So that kind of rounds out the update on COVID for next year. Again, important to note that we did not include any COVID costs in our core budget. They're separated out at this point.
So, just some of the key takeaways before we wrap up here. The budget is predominantly driven by that insurance component that we just justifiably spent a lot of time talking about. Everything else in our budget is basically designed to preserve our current level of service. The pandemic is a wild card, and Vin, I think, address the fact that we are obligated to address learning loss. So I think we would want to do that anyway, obviously, but the federal grant funding provides some resources for us to be able to do that. But the 2 points of safety and success, that's where we're planning. And a lot of some of these other communities are receiving money in the millions. Obviously, we're not close to that over the next 3 years. I mean, thankfully, I don't think we've been impacted to the point where we need $36 million or whatever the case may be. But that's where we are in terms of our COVID spending. And then, of course, I think we provide an outstanding value for the community. So again, I started by talking about the team effort necessary for our success, which includes the political bodies like the council and the Board of Education. But I think our parents, staff, and students deserve the lion's share of our recognition for everything they've done over the last year to help our kids and community be successful. So that wraps it up for me, and I think we'll be happy to take any questions.
Right. Thank you, Dr. Solon and the board, and Mr. Massiana for all of your hard work here in presenting this. As a courtesy, since Councilmember Talbot took the time to send some questions ahead, I'd like to turn to him first and see if, to your satisfaction, the questions were answered, or if you still have more follow-up regarding those.
The answers to the questions were outstanding and as quick as you could have wanted. There's always more questions, David. So if you want me to kick it off, I'm happy to.
Sure, if you'd like to, yes.
I'll start with a couple comments. What would it take to get Greenwich moved out of our DERG? Because they really screw up everything for the entire DERG B, because they are so out of whack with what everybody else does, and they make all of us look bad. I wanted to mention, you talked about the slide with the medical claims. That's on page 2 of employee benefits in the budget book. I think it says page 10 in the presentation. That's on page 2. I would be remiss to not talk about Norton as a blue ribbon school. Just pointing out that school lies within the 4th district of the town of Cheshire, and there are currently 2 council members that are alma mater of Norton School that sit on this council. So I just want
And a Board of Education vice chair.
And we didn't bring
go.
it up to a blue ribbon school either, Peter.
Notably, you were alumni when it was recognized.
Getting into the question portion, and going back to enrollment stuff. So I'm looking at page, I don't know what it is. It's the first page of the enrollment tab. How convenient. And I'm looking at the 1998 birth year, which was the 2003-2004 school year, where the total school enrollment was 5165, which was kind of our high water mark. And then you go down to the bottom, which is birth year 2025 and school year 2030-2031. And the high mark is going to be 4453, which is 712 students less than it was at our high water mark, and gets us back in the neighborhood of the 2014-2015 school year. So, so we're seeing this ebb and flow. And I guess the question in a long-winded statistical explanation is, are we getting too much into chasing 1 year variance, either on the positive or negative side, when, there were years when we eliminated 16 teachers. So, should we be, trying to stay more even keel instead of going up and down with chasing some of these numbers, I guess is where I'm going with this.
I wish I had, I could quickly pull up the SLR projection, because I think what you'd see there is not as much ups and downs as when you look over a longer period of time, you'd see a trough. That you'd see maybe ups and downs as it travels down, but we hit rock bottom, and now we're projecting to come back up. So, look, as you back out, maybe over a short window, you might see some up and down in enrollment, but over a 15, 20-year period, what you would see is where we are right now is that we've hit bottom. Probably, this year, last year at some point, and are now trending back up in our enrollment. And that's projected out over the next 10 years, as we discussed like last night in the school modernization committee, that's really the projection, and that's what's putting the pressure on our facility planning for the elementary schools is, in particular, over the next 8 to 10 years, we're looking at substantial growth in enrollment at that level.
Yeah, because I think to that point, Dr. Solon, you start out in birth year 85, which was school year 90-91, and
Right.
you were at 4311, and you rose the 800 to get to the 5165, and it took several years. It took 15 years to do that, and then you had 15 years of decline, and now you're starting to see an increase, and we're going to get back to what we were 15 years ago by the end of at least the NASDAQ enrollment. So it's kind of a trough and a peak on the other two sides, and it seems to be like a 15-year cycle. You're absolutely right.
And by looking at the NASDAQ, and I think that's kind of natural, as I indicated in the presentation, that as our community has aged more recently, you're seeing turnover, infusing that new cycle starting again. And I think what I find most interesting is this in this NASDAQ that you're referencing, that first chart on the enrollment, that we're slated to hit rock bottom in 22-23 with 4,030 students. We currently have 4,070 students. So it just indicates that we're rebounding, and maybe COVID played a role, but we're rebounding more quickly than initially anticipated, which makes me a little nervous about our facility master planning project, that if we continue this trend, the pressure to do something sooner rather than later becomes greater, obviously.
Yep. Moving on to the COVID stuff, and I am looking at the tab for state and federal grants, page 1. And one of the advanced questions I had was about the anticipated Corona and ESSER and APR, and you answered that both the other day and tonight with it's a little over 1.5 million. In the anticipated cost that you talked about, what is the reason for the 20 additional broadcast classrooms if we really honestly feel that come the 21-22 school year that hopefully everybody's back into the classroom, or certainly it's no worse than it was this year with students staying away from the classroom. So what was the anticipated reason for the additional broadcast classrooms?
Yeah, unfortunately, in spite of superintendents like myself imploring the state to make a decision on whether or not they would be permitting students to stay remote, that decision has not yet been made. So there is the possibility that the state may say students, like they did this year, can elect to stay remote for the year. If they do that, the quality of instruction, and we found this year, provided through those audio systems is so dramatically better than when you don't have it and you're just doing it through a desktop computer. I mean, you can hear everybody in the classroom incredibly clearly. They're like participants in the room. We've provided the best possible situation. And one of the things we thought about going into this was it's a substantial investment, right? I mean, $60,000 to do 20 rooms. We've already done a lot. We need to make sure that whatever investments we make in infrastructure are fit 3 categories for us. One, they have to really improve the experience for students at home. And we've checked the box with our setup. They have to be able to, post-COVID, provide meaningful, significant benefit to students in the classroom. The audio, I would love to take you to any of our audio classrooms. It's dramatically different than what you remember from sitting in class. And we have a lot of data to illustrate that there's tremendous benefit with the audio in the room. I first saw it in Weston when I was there doing learning walks and providing feedback on their instruction, and it blew my mind. So, we looked at that, and this was an opportunity to improve, but also address the need for COVID. Finally, the other thing that we considered was it has to be portable. So let's say that, Cheshire hit the equivalent of the town Powerball tomorrow, and we built a brand new school. We can take these systems out of existing rooms and bring them with us someplace. So this checked all the boxes. If indeed we need to go to remote learning again next year, it's going to be powerful for those kids that are remote. But again, I don't have an answer on that. As Vin has said, a lot of this is still up in the air. We can't predict into next year.
And then I think my my final for now, and it's probably not as much a question as it is a kind of a statement on numbers. And I am looking at the supplemental information tab on page 2, which is pretty much the kind of the funding, the budget year, the superintendent's recommendation, Board of Ed approved, council approved, and so on and so forth. Just to point out over the 21 years covered, the increase in the 21 years is an 82% increase in funding for the Board of Education. And numbers can be a little deceiving. As you receive more funds, if you get $1 million when your total budget is only 50 million, the percentage is going to be a lot different than when you're receiving 73 or 74 million. So just to kind of visualize that, when the 2003-2004 school year, the increase was 1.4 million, but the percentage increase was 3%. So now we go to 2021, the current year, where you got an increase of 1.25. Granted, it's $150,000 less, but that was only a 1.7% increase. And it was only $150,000 less. So you went from 3% down to 1.7. And the reason is because as you continue to increase in your budget, $1 million just doesn't look as good as it did a year ago. So just to point out that, some of the numbers, because one of the things I know you pointed out was the increase over the past several years has been 1.6, but that's probably equivalent from a percentage wise to what you were getting back in the 10-year ago range.
Inflation also factors in there, and I would just say that I took Greenwich out real quick of the calculation. That the difference would be $4 million instead of 5 and change. So that's, I know you wanted to know like what would happen.
Yeah, it was more of a a quick comp, because when you look at them sitting at the top, they're so far.
They tend to skew the average.
Yeah, exactly. They skew the averages. So, and then this really isn't a budget thing, but it's a curiosity question. I know you touched on testing results and where we stand statewide. I guess the question is more of an effect COVID has had and the change in learning environment. I'd be curious, and you can, anytime where you get a, if there is such a thing as a spare moment,
Sure.
what the kind of the test scores were in 18-19, and then 19-20 as COVID began, and then 2021 when we were in full COVID.
Sure.
And I'm
Yeah,
sure
so
you have those.
I don't actually, and I'll explain that. 18-19 was the last year that the Smarter Balance Assessment was administered, and I like to use that because it's an apples to apples comparison. Everybody in Connecticut takes that exam. So then 19-20, it wasn't administered due to COVID. In 2021, it has not yet been administered.
Okay.
So I'll get those results over the summer. And I think everybody's eager to know, where do our students stand compared to historical performance and then compared to other communities. I think we all want to know that, but I unfortunately won't have that data for many months now. Our students haven't even begun taking the test yet.
Yeah, if you would, I'd be, like you say,
Absolutely.
as others are, and not so much how we compare what the change was, but what our, within our own community, what an impact on COVID,
Sure.
COVID had on the learning experience for students. So,
Absolutely.
Mr. Barowie, that's it for now, but thank you very much to all of you.
Thank you. I see Ms. Pavano's hand up. If like to go, Sandy?
Thank you so much. I guess I would direct this to Vin. When you were explaining the budget expenditures, you mentioned the words shared services. Could you explain what I would imagine those impact savings for the town? Could you explain what categories the shared services would fall into?
Yeah, well, I'll hit on a couple of them that, and I know Jeff can pepper this if he needs to, but probably the largest shared service that we have is the medical benefits, dental benefits. We do bid those jointly with the town. And, by doing that, we think we get much better value, much better rates from the provider, which is now Cigna. We did switch out from Anthem several years ago. We're looking to make some additional, changes with the pharmacy benefits within Cigna as well. The second one is Apex Technology. Apex, for years has served as essentially the chief information officer for the town and Board of Ed. The fee that we pay them, which is a little over $200,000 per year, and it's split. That cost is split between the board and the town. Is an incredible value in from my viewpoint. We get not only network engineers and monitoring of our network, but any projects and implementation is covered by that contract. So if we had to buy those services or hire people to do those jobs, we probably couldn't hire enough staff to do that. And it would be, at least double what we're paying in terms of Apex. Other shared services, the one that I'd like to mention is when the schools pay to have a contractor plow whenever there's snow, but the town provides the sanding service, after each snowstorm. We also share some of the maintenance on the fields that are done. And those are the larger ones that come to mind. I don't know, Jeff, if there's any that you like.
Yeah, on the instructional side, things like recently we entered a shared service agreement with surrounding districts who are providing transportation to students who are outplaced out of their district. So, it used to be that local districts would send a van with 1 or 2 students to another town at substantial cost. Special ed transportation is super expensive. What we've done is build a collaboration with other communities through ACES where, hey, if our van is driving through your town, we'll pick up your child on the way to that school in the community saving both parties or multiple parties substantial money. So that's been one. Very creatively this fall, we had a couple teachers with really deep, legitimate concerns about being in the classroom in person. We traded teachers with Meriden. As part of that, we also received, I said, you guys do a lot with, supporting teachers of color. What resources could we get to help with that? They've allowed us to join their affinity group for Black teachers. They've provided professional development for us at no cost that we would have had to otherwise purchase. So, we do work with other communities to, try and leverage our needs and our resources.
Thank you.
Sure.
There is one more that I see Mr. Kimball is raising his hand, but I'm going to beat him to the punch on this one. We last year hired a project manager to help oversee the capital projects that we do on the town and Board of Ed side, who's doing a great job. His name is Dan Bombero. We do split the cost of that employee with the town's budget as well.
Yeah, thank you, Ben. I was going to mention that. And also just this year in particular, emergency response. Both Vin and Jeff are on our weekly emergency operations center calls every Friday. I know they look forward to those calls, but they're great for coordination, sharing resources, sharing PPE, and obviously coordinating on the vaccine rollout in town this year. We've been partners every step of the way, and I think that's why you've seen some good results. So I just want to throw that out there.
Yeah, our tech department coordinated all the technology on the vaccination side, which I know Maura was incredibly grateful for. And obviously we've been very grateful that she's been able to facilitate our staff and hopefully soon students through that process as well. Jim, I know you've been patient.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Yeah,
Mr.
I have a question, Mr. Barrow.
Yes, I was just going to call you Councilman Jenks.
Okay, yeah, that's fine. It's fine. And nothing if not patient. This question goes to Vin and maybe to Sean, actually. So in your write-up, Vin, you're referencing this. I mean, there's so many kind of relief funds and stimulus funds and stuff that have been coming our way. So you're referencing Coronavirus Relief Act funds and CARES Act funds. I don't know if those are sort of the same or not, actually, but aren't we still, I know there was an amount we're kind of expecting from American Rescue Plan funds that's coming through the state, and then also an additional amount perhaps for county level funding. I don't know, has that been is there any resolution on when those dollars might be coming, and is any of that included in your cost analysis and your expenditure analysis for the next year or so?
So I'll answer the first part, Sean, and then you can answer for the town side. So in the COVID supplemental budget, I did include on the bottom line, there's two additional funding sources that one we have details on, the $439,559, that's ESSER 2. And we know we've gotten all the details and the information, except for when we could start drawing that money, but it's coming soon. The American Rescue Plan for the school side is $1,091,000 and change. We're waiting for details and how to obtain that funding. The mechanics that are involved, I'll let Sean speak to that, because that revenue, just like the $706,075 we received in ESSER 1, the revenue does flow to the town, and we offset our expenses. We pay for it out of our operating budget and then offset it against the revenue is the way we've done it. I anticipate that's the way we'll do it going forward. So if I just recap, the funds already received were $85,000 in CARES Act and $706,000 this year in ESSER 1. The funds that we have for next year through 2024 are ESSER 2, $439,000, and American Rescue Plan, $1,091,000 on the school side.
Yeah, and I could just piggyback on that, Jim. If you recall in my initial slides, the estimates we had received for the ARP for the school side there was an $857,000 estimate is not, my understanding is that's based on Title I formula funding. So I think there's a little discrepancy between the 857 and the 1,090,000 that Vin is referencing in the estimates he's received. The answer to your question about clarity is there still is not any. I was on about a 3-hour call with municipalities this morning. It's a topic of continued conversation as some communities are trying to get their arms around what I had referenced in one of my previous and initial presentations on the budget. The county level funding does look to be confirmed, which for us, if they disperse it on the per capita basis that the legislation requires, is actually an additional about $5.5 million. So it actually is larger than the other two amounts we had talked about. The one thing we learned this morning is while the ARP Act requires that the funds, the first tranche, there's two 50% tranches of the funding, be dispersed within 60 days. For communities under 50,000 people, that won't flow straight from Treasury to the community. It'll flow through the state first, at which point the state has 30 days to give us the funding. So there will be a little more like a 90-day period versus 60 days. So, but again, I won't go through all the details that we know at this point because a lot of them are not confirmed, to be honest. But we are looking for more guidance, and we're on as many of these calls and opportunities to engage. We're hoping with CCM directly with someone from Treasury in the coming weeks, which is a call that we're all looking forward to get some of these questions answered. Because as you've seen around us, some communities are making different decisions and promises for how they're going to use the funding than others are. I guess I'll leave it at that.
Presumably if it is 5.5 million or wherever it is, some of that is going to be earmarked for the school side, some for the town side, just like other funding, right?
No, actually not. No, there's 2.8 million that's directly for the towns. And then this is for states. Again, for states that have county governments, this money would be going to the counties. In our case, it would be coming directly to the municipalities on a per capita basis. It's just the way the act is written. So I actually don't think that will be the case.
I also would want to elaborate just a little bit to strongly urge us to remember that these are one-shot revenues. Yes, we're going to have about 30 months in which to spend them, but they are one-shot revenues. And there are towns, as Sean said, there are towns around us, especially one with financial difficulties to the south of us, that's looking, oh, this is a great way I can balance everything off, as I've read in the paper. And I would be dead set against using this as a crutch to get us to artificially lower the mill rate all at once. This is not what this is for. These funds are one-shot, one-time funds that are not intended for us to look good for 1 year artificially and then have to double up to make up for it the following year. It's tough enough that we used a good bit more of our one-shot revenue, if you will, from our fund balance last year, $2.2 million. And now we got recommendation from town manager to use $1 million, which is about what the town has been using the last few years. But now we got a $1.2 million hole we're starting with. So just like the settlement money from the sewer, the water use from the prison was a one-shot deal of revenue, and it was wisely decided to be used over time and for some solid long-term good for the community, offsetting some of the sewer capital charges and et cetera. I think we're going to want to take a good look at this to be something more of a long-term than a short-term thing.
Just to be clear, I wasn't suggesting anything with my questions. I was just trying to clarify what was coming, really more than anything else.
No, and this wasn't directed at you specifically, but I wanted to elaborate what on Sean said.
Right. Okay.
Because it's all just happening now, fast.
Yeah.
I didn't mean to cut you off with just an elaboration of the answer. Did you have more comments, Councilman Jenks?
No, I'm good. Thank you.
Okay. I do want to make one other comment because it is related, and then I see Councilman Walsh's hand. The governor just signed an executive order, which Sean had let us know was going to be coming. Our town attorney confirmed that we're right on this tonight while we've had this meeting. That is going to potentially allow the legislative bodies of the communities additional time to adopt a budget, similar to what we had last year. But last year was a uniform time. You got an extra 30 days from whatever you had. This year, it's not that. So I'm sure Mayor Orris is going to have this to look at, as the council chairman, and see what we would be doing. But I think having some extra time is certainly helpful, because we'll know more about these funds, but we'll also know more about the regular year-over-year funds, like the potential expansion of pilot funds that may be a recurring item, which recurring items are great. We'll take those every day and use them for operating expenses if they're recurring. So we've got a lot of moving pieces in this still unusual year. And I think the possibility that we have some additional time to put these pieces together is going to be good. But I also think we've got to watch what the revenues are and what their intention is. Are they recurring revenues that we will receive year after year, or are they one-shot, one-time revenues that we may have strings attached to them? There are going to be some strings attached to that $5.5 million over 2 years. And some of it is, I believe it was outdoor and recreation was a possibility. Water, which we don't have an issue there. Sewer, which we do have an issue, maybe could help with some of the bonding. But my point is, let's be careful before we start in our mind, because a lot of new information is coming out quickly, and some of it will have operational budget implications and some really won't, but we'll have long-term, maybe capital and other types of expenditures. So just wanted to update everybody on what's been happening even while we're having this meeting. So tonight. All right, with that, are there further questions? Councilman Walsh, I'm sorry I called on you. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I had a few questions. First question, when it's about enrollment, having spent so many months on the SMC, that was the biggest question about, guessing how many students we're going to have in the future, and what we currently have, and looking at EdSite. I see there's a difference from what is being told to us. It has 157 students at Darcy, and from what I see, it's 62 students. Which is the correct number?
There may be 62 kindergarten students, but we have 110 in right now in pre-K.
Okay.
So I'm not sure where you're looking on EdSite.
Yeah, I was just looking at the EdSite at the total number, and it said for Darcy School it's at 157.
Yeah, that sounds like the kindergarten number, Don.
Okay.
Yeah, but
Yeah.
there's several different, there's two different pre-K programs that are run out of Darcy, and that's included in our enrollment.
Right. Okay. I because I look at the number that are in Doolittle, when you have classes with 12 kids, 14 kids, I'm wondering if there was a way that we could have squeezed some of those Darcy students back into Doolittle. When I saw 62, I thought, well, why would we open a building for 62? But if you're saying it's 170 something, okay, I could see that. I understand why we're opening the building for that. But I was just wondering if we could have squeezed any more of these students, at least the kindergarten, into Doolittle and still keep, maybe the classroom size to 19. Was that a possibility, or?
Well, I guess let me give you an update that we're working on, because the enrollment is expected to increase next year, all across our kindergarten grades. We are moving 2 of the Darcy kindergarten back to Doolittle. Okay, so we are preparing for that. So there's obviously a lot of logistics involved in doing that.
Right.
It's really not so much to change the class sizes as much as it is to make sure that we have sufficient room at Darcy for the additional kindergarten students that, we expect to come in.
Okay.
And if you look also, the enrollment projection for next year, when we built this budget, the class sizes at Darcy were 15, 16. We're anticipating to be 18 and 19, next year. That's the way, we designed the budget. We always have to adjust as we get through the summer and see what enrollment is, across these grades. So that's
well, as well as I, SLRs enrollment projections were higher than this NASDAQ. And
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, they're predicting by 2030, I think it was 4,700 students or something like that. So, I mean, who knows? They might be more technical in getting their numbers because they're counting in new buildings, new all of that, which NASDAQ probably doesn't count in. So, it's all up in the air right now. And as a member of the SMC, I knew it was a difficult thing. So we had to go on the high end on that because God forbid we went too low and then we'd have to start changing numbers and changing size of buildings and everything else. So I get that. It's a tough thing to predict. And you know what? Hey, we're a growing community and I think we're going to, people are coming to this community for a reason. And I think Dr. Solon hit on it. The schools. It's not the nightlife, not yet, but it's the schools, and it's a credit to what you guys have done, and kept and especially this last year, keeping the kids in school as you did. I think it was great for them. So I appreciate that, and I know I've talked to many people who have appreciated that as well. Another question on instructional assistants. I know those are mainly for special ed. How many total instructional assistants are there and how many of them are for special ed versus?
Well, the bulk are for special education, some in the classroom to serve several special ed students. Some are assigned to work one-on-one with students. And
right.
I'm just flipping through the book to give you the.
Well, Vin's doing that, Don. First of all, thank you for the acknowledgement of keeping the kids in. That was such a priority for us. One thing I would point out about the kindergarten that was a little unique this year is that at the 11th hour, when we had students who had a birthday that kind of fell on the precipice and there was a lot of fear about, oh, we're going to go remote, parents decided to keep their kids home. And they said, you know what, we're not going to enroll in kindergarten this year. Mm-hmm. And so that was a variable that we typically don't deal with. Usually a student will commit and we know that, okay, this is what we have in kindergarten.
Yeah.
But as I said, at the very last minute, we had a significant number of holdouts, which concerns me more so for next year when at least we have those students on our radar. Mm-hmm. I couldn't give you an exact number off the top of my head, unfortunately, but I know that influenced our kindergarten placement this year.
Okay.
At Darcy and across the board.
Okay.
Yeah, so the accounts are, we have 135, and we use full-time equivalents, and it's in the budget book. So we have 135, full-time equivalent of 30-hour instructional assistants for special education. Mm-hmm. We have another 20 that are classroom services instructional assistants, but those are primarily in our kindergarten classroom. Okay. There is an instructional assistant in each kindergarten classroom. And then we have 11 that we call literacy support instructional assistants. So all told, it's about 160 full-time equivalent instructional assistants.
So yeah, okay, I see it. All right. The other thing, last year, I know we have approved a funding of an audit for in the athletic department area. Did that ever go through, or is that planning to go through, or?
Yeah, there was no funding. It was when the new audit firm was selected, it was put out to bid. They did bid $12,000 for an audit of the student activity funds. So that audit did not take place. It was bid, but we just didn't go through with the audit.
Because if you remember last year, I brought up the account in the athletic department that you guys said you don't control, but there's still a lot of money in that, and I'm just wondering what's going on with that, and and I think that's part of the reason why we had discussed this. I'm just wondering if do you plan on doing the audit, or is it?
Mr. Griffin.
I don't want to answer the question because I'm not sure it's my authority to answer that question.
I was just going to say, I think it's Mr. Grippos, and he's got his hand up to give an answer. It's more of a policymaker.
We still wish it to happen.
Okay.
We want it to happen. We're trying to figure out what the levers are to make that happen.
Okay,
So it's
thank you,
not
Adam.
entirely clear to us
All
how
right.
to proceed,
Okay.
but we do want it to happen.
Okay, thank you. And one final thing. Did you guys look into the cost of buying tents versus renting? I mean, because if you look at it, I mean, we're going to be spending almost $500,000 on tents. And I'm just wondering, could we have bought, 7-10 tents, for $100,000, or I don't know what tents cost, but versus spending almost $500,000 on tents.
Yeah, I think that, I mean, that's really Vin's domain, but I will jump in to acknowledge that tents are not our specialty around here. We're used to running the circus tent free,
Right.
but this year we had no idea how long or how successful tents would be. So to make a substantial purchase investment there seemed a little irresponsible at the time. The other thing is, when the tents go up, we really need somebody on call who's a tent specialist to deal with issues. So for example, at Dodd, I recall in the fall, there being a really heavy storm one weekend, and there was tons of rain pooled in one of the tents. It looked like one of the sides was in rough shape. We were able to make a call, have a tent specialist come out the next, that day, I think it was even that day, and rectify the situation immediately, to make sure they're up safe, secure. And then, what do we do with all those tents if we were to buy them? It just didn't seem to make great fiscal sense. Like retrospectively, a year and a half later, like that we're still going to be using tents potentially next fall. Would it have been better possibly to buy them? I don't know, but that's one of those, I think, Monday morning quarterbacks. Yeah, maybe, but I don't know. I think we tried to make the best decision at the time. Vinny, I don't know if you have anything to add on that.
No, it's just really these are obviously not 10 by 10 tents. These are tents that have to be installed, permitted. They have to meet a certain fire retardant level. I don't know how much they cost. I mean, I would bet they're pretty expensive. And, frankly, I hope we never have to do them other than graduation again. But
the other variable is they were super hard to find, because at the time when we were doing it, every restaurant in Connecticut had some sort of tent going. And so we thankfully had the right connection to be able to get large tents. I don't know what it would have been like to try and purchase them at the time, because everybody seemed to be wanting tents at that time that we were doing.
Yeah, no. And if it makes you feel a little bit better, the vendor that we use is Durant's Tents here in town. So there'll be some tax revenue that comes back to the town, I suppose.
We like that. Well, I'm happy to hear that you're using local. But yeah, I appreciate it. I just was thinking, and I don't mean to be
Totally agree.
I don't mean to be a Monday morning quarterback, but it's like, you start looking at the numbers and say, okay, if we need it next fall, what if we need it the following spring? And then before you know it, we've spent almost $1 million on tent rentals, and you could have bought 10 tents, and if they collapse, they collapse, but I appreciate it. But thanks, guys. That's all I have for right now. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilman Walsh. Are there other council questions or comments? All right, seeing none, I have one Councilman Veliver, and then I have one, and then.
Thank you very much. And Superintendent, I also want to echo the sentiments of thank you for your determination and to keeping these kids in school. I think it's been very helpful for them. Also, admittedly, perhaps anyone else listening, for any parents who work from home, having the kids in school all day is very helpful as well. But I do think it's very important for them, I think, to keep that social aspect of it. So I appreciate your efforts to keep them in school, which leads me to my question about the high school. And maybe this has already been addressed, but I guess in your budget, is there a concept of going back to full high school next year? What would the
going back now of this year? So we anticipate.
Well, I know they have 4 days, right? They have the option of going back for 4 days out of 5.
Correct. We've maintained the 4-day schedule because on the 5th day, that Wednesday, every single class, we built a schedule where every single class meets. And it's also, we conduct wellness activities. Actually, NBC is in the process of doing a story our students design wellness activities for the student body, and we execute those on Wednesdays. So it's part of that overall wellness that we're very sensitive to with how their lives have been disrupted, our students, over the last year. But we're looking to get back at least to 4 days for anybody who wants it very soon. After the break, we'll have tents available. The dining is really tough when you have, 1,500 individuals, no masks. That's the biggest impediment for us. So after break, the high school will have a tent. We want to get everybody who's 4 days, anybody who wants to be 4 days a week. And then ultimately, I hope as we move into May that we can look at really pushing that and going 5 days a week for everybody.
So next year, you would hopefully anticipate at least 4 days a week, maybe 5 days a week.
Yeah, I think our goal would be 5 days a week next fall. That's predicated on continued progress, particularly with our upperclassmen receiving vaccinations, that those who want it, everybody who accesses the vaccination reduces the risk of significant spread. So, there are a lot of variables as we kind of consider the remainder of this year and next year. It's seemingly constantly changing as Mr. Barrowy was, giving us up to the minute updates. Like things are just constantly changing at this point.
Absolutely. Well, that's great. That's good news. And hopefully is that we get back to something a little bit more approaching normal for next school year. So your budget as proposed contemplates that already.
Correct. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, we would be in school.
Okay. And then my second question goes to Vin. You had mentioned and this is it's a small number in the budget, but I want to make sure I try to understand it a little better. You had mentioned that the lunch program and the sort of the loss of $500,000 that you're able to mediate down to $300,000. And I just wanted to see, I guess I wasn't totally understanding exactly how that works. And does it relate? Do you expect to see that kind of loss again next year? Or do you think that that's simply COVID related because mostly the high school kids aren't in school all the time?
If we're back, I don't expect it to repeat next year. We've never had that, here in Cheshire.
Right.
As long as students are back in, we expect that food service, will be break even or better. The dynamics that occurred, especially in the early part, most of that loss was incurred in the early part of the year when we had, more remote students. We had less students at the high school, where we were getting no a la carte sales at all. And, part of that was, I think, a little bit of a fear factor. Students were bringing their lunch, not buying our school lunch and not buying a la carte. So things have certainly improved as we got through, the first 4 months of school. So, the food service budget is certainly looking a lot better this year, and I think we'll be fine next year.
All right. And when you say a la carte, you mean stuff that's not in the
snacks,
the
water,
snacks, right?
Right.
Anything
so
that,
not a full meal.
Right.
So when we offer a student a full meal, it's a set price, and if it's a free or reduced lunch student, which everyone is free this year, that's a full meal. It has to have a fruit, a vegetable, a protein. Everything outside of that is a la carte, and it does generate quite a bit of revenue, for the schools, especially at the older grades. Other, there's just so many elements to this. The other thing that we can't do at the high school is there's three different tiers of lunch we ordinarily offer. We just can't do that this year. We're offering, one lunch. It's the free, lunch. It's a high quality lunch, but it doesn't make the same revenue if we were selling the premium lunches.
Gotcha.
No supersizing this year.
Good. Yeah, good. The other question just related to that is back at the early part, we were, there was a lot of free food, basically, there were, a lot of town residents were offered the opportunity to come and get a free meal. Everybody, not only the kids who would normally get free meals, but any student could get a free meal and their families could come get the free meal. Was that covered? Were those meals covered by the federal government, or does that go to some of the deficit as well?
No, those free meals, are essentially fully paid for. We're reimbursed for the
Right.
cost of those, and we're still doing that, but the number of students, and it's available for, anyone age 18 or under that lives in town, but it's primarily our school students.
Good.
There's about 300 meals per 300 students that we're serving per week, and they are getting 7 days of meals. So the number is way down from what it was because students are in school and getting their lunch at school.
And then just finally, the making up that 200,000, is that because more revenues coming in, or did you end up having to shift funds from other accounts to cover some of that deficit?
The deficit that we need to cover this year, you're asking
Yeah,
about?
right. Yep.
So what we do with our non-payroll accounts, and that includes the purchases that are made, at the schools for everything from curriculum supplies to textbooks to, furniture or equipment that's needed, as well as our maintenance lines. Those are all our non-payroll lines. We have a 60% maximum spend on those lines, which we typically do. It's just usually by April, we're at 80%. So by holding back that 40% from the various lines across the schools, we'll be able to make up that 289,000. So the trade-off is we're not purchasing things or repairing things that we would want to do, but we have to prioritize, and we're pretty good at that.
Yeah.
So we're doing the things we have to do and holding off on the things we can't do.
No, okay, that was what I was getting at. I was wondering if you had to take funds from other sources that you didn't spend on other things potentially and shift them potentially to cover that, at least in the short term.
Right.
Okay. All right, that includes some of the maintenance items. So, okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Gulliver. As the hour is getting late, before I hand it back to Mr. Orris, I'm just going to ask one question. And of course, thank you, gentlemen. My one question is most of the increases are obvious, but with account 330 and the other professional services, there's quite a large increase, 185,000, 30%. I had trouble getting my hands around what that was overall. Was a lot of it seemed like software and stuff like that. Was that something that's an enhancement that could wait a year? What is it?
No, what it is there's two in the budget book. If you look at that 330, there's detail on the following page. So about 80,000 of it is to increase the legal services budget, not above where it used to be, but we reduced it quite a bit, for the 2021 budget, frankly. Same thing for technology services. We actually cut that line, which is primarily used to fund the Apex technology share. We cut that way back for 2021. So we just need to restore it to where it's supposed to be. But, that is a good question. That's the answer to it, though. We really cut that budget way back, and we need to get it, to where it should be.
All right. Thank you, gentlemen. Thank you very much, Mayor Orris. I'll hand the meeting back to you, and I'm sure you have a question.
Jay, thank you. I did have a few more questions, though. You probably didn't see my hand.
I'm sorry.
So are you looking to end the meeting, or do I have time?
No, I'm looking to have you ask questions and then be the final one that asks.
Okay. I have a lot, so I'm only going to ask a few, and then what I'll do is I'll do like Councilman Talbot. I'll send an email and hopefully get some answers. But just quickly, the enrollment numbers that we have in our budget book are from NESDEC. Sounds like you're not completely comfortable with them. So I'm clear, you're asking for 2 new teachers based on increased enrollment in K through 6, correct?
Yes,
And then there's no other changes, there's no reductions or add-ons anywhere else in the system for teachers, correct?
correct.
So when you look at again, if the NESDEC numbers are not something we can rely on, I'd love to see, if you want us to look at the SLR numbers, I know they were in the SMC stuff, maybe we can get whatever you think is really more reliable. But when you look at the 7 through 8 and the 9 through 12 enrollment numbers from NESDEC, those numbers are going down quite a bit. You can see just over from 21 and 22, there's a reduction of 45 students in 7 through 8, and then 58 through 9 through 12 age group. Just so the public, because I do hear from the public that says, well, when we're in a declining enrollment, why aren't we seeing reductions in teachers? And I'm not advocating for that, but I'm certainly asking the question as to, why are we staying flat relative to the reductions that we see or expect, not only in 7 through 8, but it looks like it goes on for a much longer period at the high school level. There's 4 years in a row from 2021 all the way down to 24-25, where you're going to lose 251 students in the high school. So, how are you looking at staffing relative to those projections?
Sure. One of the areas I could address particularly to the high school is that if you recall way back when, I don't know, it feels like 8 years ago now, but it was just, I think, 8 months ago or so that we went through the EAC contract negotiations. Now in Cheshire High School, historically, teachers at Cheshire High School taught 6 periods in an 8-period day. And that's something that was incredibly unique to Cheshire. Most districts teach 5 in a 5-period in an 8-period day. And so in a binding arbitration world, that would be something that would either command significantly more money, or we would have to change the scheduling component. With the trending decline in enrollment at the high school, we phased in a reduction in the number of classes, a third for the teaching staff over the year. So a third of our teachers next year will only be teaching 5. The 6th period will either be providing collaborative time, student intervention time, or an assignment from the administration. And that will change on a regular basis for those individuals. So that's where you're not seeing necessarily the decline in staff because of that contractual component. And I just wanted to pull up the middle school piece to that. In the budget presentation, we've hovered between 22 roughly and 25 students per class. Next year, it's at 21.9 in 8th grade, but 23.3 in 7th grade. So it's a 1-year blip in the way that, we do it. It's with teaming at the middle school is very hard to reduce one singular teacher. You basically have to do 2. So if we dropped 2 teachers there because of certifications and teaming, the numbers would go significantly up. So it's kind of a rock and a hard place at the middle level, but it's not. The numbers aren't wildly outside of our norm either. When you look at the historical data, they're pretty much right on where we are. Maybe a drop lower in 8th grade than they typically are, but right on the average in 7th grade.
Yeah, just
because we have reduced positions there over the last several years.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think it was for 1920, we did reduce 2 teachers at
Right.
7th grade. That's why you saw the students, per the average class size go up in 7th grade at Dodd.
So where are you with expected retirements? Because I think this budget assumes 0, correct?
Yes, I mean, the budget does assume 0. Right now, I only have 1 teacher retirement.
And what is more typical, 5 or 6?
Well, it's hard to know typical because last year we offered a early retirement incentive. So we're not anticipating a significant number of retirements last year, because if you were close, you were probably taking the incentive last year. So I would be surprised if we get 4 or more.
Okay. So you think because of that incentive, we'll have less this year?
Yeah, I think, this year, if you're retiring, it's probably because something perhaps unforeseen, like you hit Powerball or, something that you're able to just walk away at this point rather than take the incentive from last year.
Because normally, depending on how many, usually you're having a higher price teacher retiring, you're bringing in a lower price teacher. So there's some economic benefit to that. But in this case, it sounds like we may not have that benefit.
Not to the degree we typically do, I would hypothesize.
Okay.
Yeah.
And again, I'll send you a lot of my other questions via email. The last one I'll ask you though is, in terms of IAs, are you increasing IAs? I think you are from what I read, but if you could just explain where you are in this budget in terms of new IAs.
Yeah, so this year, we've increased some IAs, but really increased time for the ones that we have too, which also influences that line. Because they're hourly employees, if we had, let's say, a dozen people move from 6.5 to 7.5 hours, that's going to influence the amount on that line. So this year we have had more demand, I think, because of COVID and cohorting, supporting students. Next year, we don't have any additional IA positions budgeted. So we're expecting to remain flat next year.
But the budget's increasing by $142,000. So that, what you're saying is that $142,000 is additional hours to people who are already employed.
It's also the contractual pay increase that they receive.
Gotcha.
So I think that's like 3% this year. In just the various classifications in that unit, the highest is 3%, and then there are some with lower percentage increases.
Well, the teacher's contract was 1.75 general wage,
Correct.
no step in year one, correct?
Correct, and the administrators, I think, was also 1.75 then?
Yes.
Well, the administration line item, which I think is both of you guys and one other individual, that was like 3.06%. But I assume you three are under contract. That's not part, right?
Correct. Yeah, we're under a different contract. The administrators that I was talking about was the bargaining unit.
I got you. Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
All right, that's it for now, Dave. I do have a bunch more of kind of technical stuff, but I'll send them over to Dr. Solon and Vin the next couple of days. Thank you both.
Sure, thank you.
All right, Dr. Solon, Mr. Massiana, Mr. Grippo, the Finance Chairman, thank you so much tonight for coming to us. I know there are going to be follow-up questions as we continue deliberating and start putting all the pieces together. Thursday night is our last night to hear all the budgets, and then we have to start deciding where we need to go in terms of additional revenues. We need to have a meeting where we'll discuss some of the updates in the revenues later in the month. As they, as we get March's numbers. And I would hope also, since these numbers were generated mainly in January, that you folks might have some updates for us as well as we move on, especially later this month. You could get updates from some of the expenditures through March, and some of your projections would tighten up, hopefully to the better, and be helpful with that. So we'll be in touch for that. Thank you very much. All right, Mayor Orris, I'll hand it back to you to conclude the council meeting.
Thank you, Chairman Bowery. Appreciate it. And with that, the only thing left is to accept a motion to adjourn our meeting.
So moved.
So moved.
Thank you, Mr. Talbot.
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Walsh. All those in favor?